Hello, welcome to Hop Along Studio. In today's video, I want to share with you how you can use tissue paper, and especially this printed tissue paper, in your art journal collages. This is a really great way of personalizing your projects, as well as using designs if you're not super comfortable with drawing your own designs. So let's get started. So in today's project, I'm going to be using a combination of printed tissue paper. I'm using both black and white printed paper. It's hard to tell on the camera, but this has white printing on it, so I'll show you how you can color that. If you don't have any printed papers, you could easily just stamp or alter your regular tissue paper to get different images. The two sets that I'm using today are these collage papers from Dina Wakley. She has one that is all faces, and she has another one that has a bunch of different patterns and designs, and including stars and circles and some writing. And so they're a really nice place to start if you're not super familiar with tissue paper, because they work quite well on a variety of surfaces. So we're going to alter these white pages so that you can see the pattern a little bit better. Here are two that I did yesterday. This one was done with gloss sprays. This one was done with spray inks. And you can see that by adding a lot of color, that the resist from the white will allow you to have the color in the background but still see the really nice white pattern. And for the ones with the gloss sprays, it did wrinkle the paper more than using it with spray inks. And so for these two, I'm going to use a combination of spray inks and paint to colorize them. So I'm using just a variety of mediums I have. I have this mixed media art spray. Well, I wasn't able to get this one working, so I'm going to actually use some of the Dina Wakley gloss sprays. It's funny, some of these were working yesterday and now today they're not. And I'm not sure what's with the nozzle of this gloss spray. It only sprays in a very tiny, small pattern, which I don't think is the purpose of it. In that case, I'm going to mix it with some of this other mixed media art spray that's green. Because you generally want to try to stick with a little bit darker colors, because that's when you're really going to see kind of some of the beauty that comes from these sprays. Yeah, my sprays are being a little cranky. I was using them a bunch yesterday, and for some reason they don't seem to be working quite as well today. It actually mixes with a little bit of ink. And I'm getting my fingers in here. You don't necessarily have to. And because I have so much liquid on the page, what I'm going to do is just add a piece of rice paper on top. That's going to absorb some of the color. And I'm purposely being messy with this. It's kind of fun sometimes just to go a little bit further with it. But what I like about this is now the rice paper that I'm using, I can use this as another layer for adding onto my collage. I could also use this as a base for doing some jelly prints as well. I absolutely love rice paper for this. Even though it does get a little bit wrinkly, I love the look of it on collage. And if you follow my channel next week, I'll be going over how to use collage with rice paper. So while the tissue paper is drying, the next thing we need to do is start adding some color to our background. And so this is really the page I'm going to be using. It's about 14 inches by about 10 inches, and it's a very large Dina Wakley journal. And I'm going to start by just adding some color onto this. So for this step, I'm going to start with some quinacridone red and quinacridone magenta for this step. And so what I'm going to do is just start at the top and add a little bit of paint. And this is a fluid paint, so it acts a little bit differently. And you would normally see a heavy body acrylic paint work on a surface. And so that's the start of some of my drips. And you could do this with some India inks, you could do this with different paints. There's a variety of things you can use for getting this kind of effect. And talking about inks, I'm going to use some Bombay India inks for this. And if you haven't seen my video about 5 ways of using ink on your backgrounds, this is a technique that I do share in that video as well. And I've included it above just so you can reference it. And in this case, I'm kind of doing the same thing. I'm going to use both the blue and the teal India ink just to add a little bit of color. And this is a fun way of just starting your page, just because it does get color down quite quickly, And kind of gives you a base to just add layers and layers and layers on top of. Take one of my tiny ones and just place it underneath here to try to not get the rest of the book edges covered in wet ink and paint. Before getting much further along and before I let this fully dry, I just thought I would add some spray ink just through a stencil. This is a grunge stencil that I found recently. I haven't actually used it on anything, so no time like the present to add something in. Because I like what I have with the layers, but I don't want it to be too much. So this is where it's kind of nice to add another color, soften things a little bit. And what's cool about using the Distress oxide sprays on already wet surface, you'll notice that the sprays are actually changing in color. The Distress oxide sprays will react to water in a really interesting way. So again, some of the teals and everything, they're now going this more patina-y blue color. So they're just adjusting kind of as they dry. And that's part of the reason I wanted to do it on a wet surface, is to try to get some of these effects. So we're just going to let this dry a little bit and then figure out how we're going to add our tissue paper onto the surface. So now that our background's dry, now let's get back to talking about tissue paper. Now I kind of deviated from that just a little bit, but I really wanted to give a background so you can kind of see the different effects you can get with the tissue papers. So right now I have an image that is printed on black, and I love this image, and I'm going to leave it in this corner just as is. I'm not going to add color to it because you'll see as I add it, the color kind of comes through. For these ones that I've altered, I'm going to use sections of them and strips of them onto the background as well. And this is where we can get some really unique results in the way that we add these. And so these can be torn. I find that tearing only works so well. They only really seem to like tearing one particular way. As long as you're kind of careful, you can generally get a fairly decent tear. And torn edges give a little bit more of a subtle look, but I'm going to leave a few of them a little less torn. And I'm going to cut out some of these individual circles as well. So now that we have kind of cut out some shapes and figured out maybe where we want some placements, I'm using some matte medium. And I'm just using a soft brush that has a little bit of give in the bristles. In this case, I'm using a catalyst brush. And I am going to just add some medium to the surface, add the tissue paper, and just add it on top. And this is where the white can end up having this really great contrast, because now you're trying to add different torn elements. You're starting to add different layers of texture and color onto your surface. And I am purposely not really worrying about this being completely smooth or perfect. If there's wrinkles, I don't really care all that much. And why I like tissue paper so much is because of the way the medium works. You can alter it, you can change it before applying it. And if you viewed my napkin video last week, what you'll notice is that this does act a little bit differently. It's a lot stronger than napkins, and it works a little bit better. But again, different imagery, different purpose. It's a little bit different using napkins versus using tissue paper, and they both kind of have their places. But I really wanted to show you how the white can work on a page, because I do think it has some very interesting properties. And you can see that I'm using one side that has a lot more of the white on it, and the other side that's a little bit muted. And again, that's another personal choice. You can add more muted color, you can add a lot more stronger color depending on what final look you're looking for. And because this tissue paper is so strong, what's nice about it is you can pull it up, you can move it. It handles a little bit of abuse as you play and try to figure out your placement. And some of this is just play. A lot of this process, I'm not really planning anything out. The only thing I really planned was what I wanted for my focal image, and that maybe I wanted to use a combination of pinks, blues, and greens. And that's about as much planning as went into this page. And that is kind of the point. Sometimes it's giving ourselves the space just to kind of do things intuitively instead of always planning things out perfectly. Because you never know what really cool effects you'll get. And I find that even if I do try to plan a page, that even as I go on, the plan changes. And so something to think about when you are creating, not to put too much pressure on yourself to have everything figured out. See what happens. See kind of how it flows as you start putting things down. See where things wrinkle. See where things lay flat. This whole page is just a fun and relaxing way of just having some creative play. I'm going to actually go in and add a few of these black ones, and that's what's really fun about having sheets that are both black and white, is then now you can add some ones that are a little bit more colorful. You can add things that are a little bit more contrasting to what you already have, and that can add some fun character to your art pieces. Now I want to add my girl onto the page. I am not a huge fan of painting faces. I know there's lots of people out there who love to paint faces, and I'm not one of them. I prefer painting animals, I prefer painting nature, and that's just who I am. I love the idea of painting faces, but the reality is I don't get a lot of joy out of it, so I don't. But sometimes I like adding faces into my work. And so this is where I really like using these tissue papers, because it allows me to sometimes when I want that person imagery in my work, then I can basically just add it in, and I don't have to spend a ton of time learning how to draw faces. And you'll notice as I'm adding this, it is blending in with the color below. And that's part of the reason I left it white, because there's no point in coloring it when I have all this great color below that I do want to see through. And if you haven't caught my other video on how to do napkins or how to decoupage, I have a video on both. You'll notice that I am working in areas and I'm working my way down the sheet. This is one way you can try to get less wrinkles in your work, is by working in sections like this. And so if you haven't seen any of those other videos, I do cover this technique in those videos as well. And I'd just love for you to check them out, and hopefully you will find them helpful. And if you've actually enjoyed this video so far, if you could subscribe and like it, that allows more people to see it, and it really does help me. I really appreciate your support and you taking the time to watch and be with me each week. And so there you see, so we basically have the girl, but you can see a lot of the undercolor with it, and that's part of the reason that I have left things white. But what's nice about it is the white does actually bring it a little bit more to the surface, so it doesn't completely fall to the background. And I love where the black and white falls in there. And then again, we have all of our black and white pieces here, and that's a great way of adding tissues onto your page. And I'm going to continue on with this project. I wanted to share with you an entire project and about how to add these elements, and then also add layers on top of them, and different ways that you can try to make this a cohesive piece instead of sections of tissue and sections of tissue and that being it. I wanted to take this a little bit further. So one thing I forgot to do was I wanted to add flowers into the girl's hair, and I wanted to make the flower centers do the same as the circles on the tissue paper. So I'm just going to add those quickly. And I just wanted to show you very quickly how you can just add flower shapes into your paintings. These aren't meant to be perfect. They're meant to be quite loose. And the thing is with painting that I think a lot of people when they're first learning struggle with is the idea that it is not meant to be done all in one layer. Sometimes we get so fixated on getting one really thick layer that we don't realize that the whole point of paint is to add it in layers. It's not meant to be a one layer medium. And something that I've really had to struggle with, because so often my attitude was it has to be really quick and it has to be done really, really quickly, and instead just taking the time just to add things in layers. And so you can see I'm just basically making 1-2 strokes, and that's it. And so that kind of gives you the start of your flower shape. Now I'm going to add some Hansa yellow medium. This color is a little bit more vibrant than the previous color. And this is where you can just do one big brush motion, and you're ending up creating more contrast to your shapes. Because it's so easy for us to get so caught up in perfect, especially in painting, that don't realize that sometimes the nicest painterly look comes from being a much looser feel. I come back in some spots that I feel like could use a little bit more of that light color. I'm just using just a flat square brush for this, which again also kind of helps me from getting too carried away with getting too particular about things. And I'm just going to add a little bit of Cad Red to these centers. I might use a slightly smaller brush. Yeah, that was a little bit smaller. It's going to start, that's a little bold, but that's okay. Probably come in with some, this is a bit bolder than I was hoping for. That's okay, and that's the thing with adding layers, is you can go back and forth until you kind of get the look you're looking for. Try some Hansa Yellow Light. That's kind of muting down that red. I might just pull a little bit of that red off. It's a little clumpy. And then come in that Hansa Yellow Light just to try to balance out the color a little bit more. So I'm going to try to have some highlights, some shadows. You want it very painterly. And there I actually pulled too much out, so I'm coming back in. And you might notice I'm just dipping in with my partially yellow paintbrush. So I really want this to be more like this wet on wet feel. This very painterly feel where we're not worrying about perfect. We're just trying to get a sense of there's flowers in her hair. Because even as a person, she's quite sketchy. So the idea of having super in-depth flowers that are perfect isn't going to really match what we already have going on so far. And I think that kind of gives the gist of it. And this is where I always have to be like, I need to put down the paintbrush, I need to put down the paintbrush, because it's so easy to fall into perfectionistic tendencies with this. And so just allowing it to be what it's going to be. And so there, we've added some flowers in, and we've kind of given her a flower crown. And now I feel like her hair could use something, so I'm trying to decide if I just want to do a little bit of mark making with my paintbrush. And because I already have red in the flowers and it's quite bold, to try to tie that in a little bit, which I know is a different color than the magenta, I'm just basically using my brush and making marks, because why not? So letting the flowers dry, I'm going to start trying to find ways to kind of help everything kind of come together in this page. I have kind of red, magenta girl, yellow flowers, and the blue. So how do we tie this together so it feels a little bit more cohesive? I'm going to try doing a couple different things. One, I'm going to add a little bit of washi tape. I've been to these Japanese washi tapes that I really like the designs of, so I'm going to choose a couple and just add a few sections onto my page. And then I'm going to follow up with that by using some StazOn ink and these Baroque ink pads. I'm going to add ink around the edges to try to tie everything in. And while I do this, I want to talk with you a little bit about my intention for this page. So even though it's an intuitive process, I usually have some thoughts in mind, or something kind of comes to mind as I'm working on this. And this particular project, I was thinking about the idea of authenticity, and even just how hard it is to be authentic in our lives. In a world of social media and the world of everything being perfect, it can be sometimes really hard to be in a place where you can kind of be like, you know what, I'm actually not okay. Or, you know what, things are not actually going all that well for me, and that's okay. But I'm just working through it, and having people in your life that will hear you out and just support you through that. It isn't always easy. A lot of us don't really have people that we can have those types of conversations with. I have a few that I do, and I'm very thankful for those friends, that I do have people in my life that will support me and understand my struggles, and instead of trying to tell me how to fix it, will just listen. And being authentic is a practice. I've been reading The Gifts of Imperfection by Brené Brown, and that's where this whole idea of authenticity kind of came from for me, because I just realized how important authenticity is, and just how hard it can be for us to sometimes feel like we can be authentic. And I love her definition of authenticity. For her, authenticity is the daily practice of letting go of who we think we're supposed to be and embracing who we are. And I love that. I love the idea that we stop trying to be what everyone else wants us to be, but being who we are. And that's not always easy, because not everyone is going to react well to authenticity, to honesty, because it does take bravery and courage. And even in this YouTube channel, sometimes it's hard for me to talk about some of the more mental health, self-care parts of it, because I don't want to be judged, but at the same time I know there's always going to be someone who's going to judge you, and we often judge ourselves even. And so sometimes a lot of it comes down to having good boundaries. It's finding ways where we can be our authentic self, and surrounding ourselves by people who embrace the same thing for their own lives. Sometimes I find that if we don't choose authenticity, I almost feel like it's worse for us if we don't. In my own situation, it's choosing to show imperfection. It's choosing to show that maybe I'm struggling with things and asking for help. And maybe when things aren't going okay, being okay with it not being okay, even if it does make people uncomfortable and they don't necessarily know what to say, or they can't help. It's being vulnerable in our lives in a way that we can reach out to others. And one thing I found about being vulnerable is that so often when you're vulnerable, then usually the person I'm talking to goes, yeah, me too. I've just never talked to anyone about it because I was kind of scared to talk about. And you realize that how many of us are just looking for that opportunity to have a little bit of vulnerability in our lives. And it just feels like, well, there's no place for that in our society. There's no place for that in our lives. But I think with having vulnerability, it also requires a certain amount of good boundaries on our part. One, who we share our vulnerability with, and knowing that we are in a safe place, because you don't want to cause a lot of trauma in your own life by being vulnerable with people who are just not going to get it and are going to basically shame you for it. And I've experienced that a lot, is a lot of shaming. A lot of, well, you don't talk about those things. That's not okay for you to talk about. Like, well, that makes me uncomfortable. Like, well, I'm sorry it makes you uncomfortable. I'm sorry that having a little bit of honesty is an uncomfortable thing for you. And I've had a lot of situations where people have gone out of their way to shame me for being authentic. But one thing I've realized from that is that so often has nothing to do with me and has everything to do with where they're at in their own lives and their own struggles and their own things that they're struggling with. And I don't say this in a way to be judgmental or unkind to people who maybe don't have the tools or aren't in the place where they can deal with authenticity, but it's also realizing that often when those situations happen, it has very little to do with you and a lot more to do with where they're at. And it's just realizing that we need to show ourselves some self-compassion, that when we are in those situations where people don't really seem to get it and aren't always kind, that we don't take it personally and that we don't let it define who we are or allow it to prevent us from being authentic. So I do like where this is going so far. The one thing I realized is by doing stuff just around the edges, it looks very much like a border, and I want to take it away from that kind of borderish look. I have also stamped over top of the washi tape, and I've also just ripped some washi tape and left it in the main area. So now I'm going to take my palette, and I'm going to add a little bit of this iridescent gold deep paint. And what I'm going to do is take a brayer and just add it to my stamp. I'm trying to use a brayer so it's a little less globby when I put it on. I do like the gold accents. And so I'm trying to get that second value out of that, because a lot of these ones seem to like you can add paint, but you can still kind of get that second value. They're more second than third values with my stamp. And again, if you haven't seen my stamping video and you don't know what I'm talking about with second or third values, I do explain it all there. And so I think that kind of breaks it up. That's kind of moving things through the page a little bit more just by adding a lot of those gold highlights. And now I'm going to just add my word authenticity, or authentic. Authenticity would be a little long. So I'm using the word authentic, and I am just very carefully using a brayer. I actually didn't clean the gold off of it, so I don't mind the idea that maybe there's some gold specks in with the black. Yeah, and so for me, authenticity is something I'm going to be working on this year. Just because I've realized even just for your sake of just feeling free in who you are, sometimes we just need to be authentic. And so what if we don't get some internet likes? So what if people don't really get it? I think it's really important that we are true to ourselves, that we're able to show people who we truly are and live according to our values and our beliefs. We'll see if this works. It kind of worked. And that's okay. I'm going to just stamp my T, and I'm probably going to go over this a little bit with a paint pen just to help it stand out, because I actually thought that would stamp a little bit better than it did. One thing about working with paint on your stamps, clean them right away. So I'm just going to step away, let this dry, clean everything, and we'll come back just to clean up the lettering and add some journaling. So now I'm going to take a few minutes and just fix up all of my lettering, and I'm also going to I might actually add something a bit to the centers too, just to help it stand out a little bit more. In this case, I'm using an Artistro paint pen. I usually use these ones, and Poscas are my favorites. I did do a paint pen video a few months back, and I talked about Poscas being my favorites, and someone had commented and said, "Hell, have you tried the Artistro ones?" And I hadn't, and honestly, they work very well as well. So if you're looking for something that's only a little bit cheaper than a Posca, give these Artistro paint pens a try. You can find them on Amazon and a bunch of other places. And the price point's a bit more reasonable. I would still say Poscas are my favorite, but these ones are a pretty close second. And especially if you're on a budget, I would definitely suggest these ones. So here's our completed page. You can see I have a lot of colors going on, probably a few more than I originally planned, but that's totally fine. I did want a certain amount of contrast in this. I was trying not to go just all completely monochromatic. So I ended up adding some extra paint pen to my words. I ended up outlining it in a little bit of pink. I was pulling the pink out of her face, and then I used that to add to the rest of my journaling. So I feel like even though there's a lot of colors going on, we have some warm tones, we have some cool tones, it all works together with the stamps and other things we've done to try to build some cohesion. So I hope you've enjoyed this video, that this is giving you some ideas on how to use these tissue papers in your work, and just how you can really turn a tissue paper as the basis of your entire art journaling page. And if you've enjoyed this video, if you could like it, subscribe to my channel, and just hit that notification button so you don't miss on any future videos. I always appreciate your support, and it means a lot to me that you follow these videos each week. And if you'd like to see the supply list, you can see it below, as well as some of the links to the other videos that I've mentioned in this video. Also, you can find more ideas on how to build a self-care habit in your own life on my website, hopalongstudio.com, and there I include the photo and written instructions for this project. I hope you have a really great week, and I will see you next time.